The wind rolled across the high desert like a living thing, carrying dust, heat, and the sharp scent of sunburned earth. Jonas Reddick rode slowly along the dry creek bed, his horse's hooves crunching over stones bleached white by years without rain. He'd spent 2 decades drifting from one forgotten corner of the frontier to another, but nothing he'd ever seen prepared him for what waited beneath the dead cottonwood tree. A girl, a shaved head, and the word unwanted smeared across her forehead in black charcoal. Jonas pulled his horse to a sudden stop. Dust swirled around him, rising in a slow, ghostly halo as he stared. The girl sat slumped against the tree's trunk, her dress torn, shoulders streaked with dried blood. But it wasn't the wounds that froze him. It was her eyes, empty, still, like someone who had gone far past fear and landed in a place where nothing hurt anymore. Jonas slid from the saddle, boots touching the ground with a soft, crunching thud. Every instinct told him to leave her, to ride on, to disappear as he always did. A marked girl meant trouble, and a man with his past didn't get to invite trouble. But something in her stillness, something in the way she didn't flinch, reminded him of a ghost he'd tried to outrun for 20 long years. He took a cautious step closer. The girl's head turned slightly. Her cracked lips parted. "Please don't hurt me anymore." The words struck him like a hammer. Jonas had seen violence. He'd seen madness. But this was cruelty made into ritual. Someone didn't just want this girl punished. Someone wanted her erased. Jonas crouched down slowly, keeping distance. Up close, he could see fresh cuts on her forearms and bruises blooming along her ribs. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly. The girl swallowed, voice barely a breath. "The whole town." Her gaze drifted toward the horizon, as if expecting demons to rise up from it. "They said I brought the devil with me." A chill crept through Jonas's spine. He'd heard stories, fear-twisted places where crops failed, children got sick, and townsfolk looked for something small and helpless to blame. But marking a child's skin? Branding her as less than human? That took another kind of darkness. "What's your name?" he asked. Her answer came as a whisper carried on the wind. "Rena. Rena Willow." Jonas nodded slowly. "Rena, did you run from them?" She shook her head weakly. "They chased me out. Said if anyone helped me, they'd hang them too." Jonas lifted his eyes to the horizon. Hoofbeats. Faint at first, then louder. Rhythmic thunder rolling closer. Rena pressed herself against the tree, trembling so hard her breath hitched. "They're coming," she whispered. "Please, don't let them take me back." Jonas stood, hand drifting toward the revolver at his hip. Running would be smart. Running would be survival. He'd been running all his life. But those hoofbeats, that rising cloud of dust. This time something inside him wasn't willing to move. 6 riders crested the ridge. Men carved out of hard years and hatred. Their horses pawed the earth like beasts eager for blood. The one in front wore a sheriff's badge, but his eyes told another truth. There was no law in that gaze, only hunger. "Well now," Sheriff Tobias Hargrove drawled, pulling his horse to a stop 20 feet away. "Looks like our little witch found herself a guardian." Jonas stayed still, placing his body between Rena and the riders. "She's just a kid." "Kid?" Hargrove spat. 3 children dead in 2 days. Crops ruined. Animals sick. And this thing shows up the same week carry-in books full of devil scratches. A heavy-built rider with burned scars leaned forward. Seeing what she wrote behind the church, he growled. "Symbols. Curses. Evil marks." Rena shook her head desperately. "I never hurt nobody. I was just trying to learn reading. My grandma's books ain't evil." Jonas's jaw tightened. Fear could twist men. Ignorance could turn them. But this level of certainty, this certainty of cruelty, meant someone was feeding the fire. "You carved her," Jonas said, gesturing to her forehead. "Your whole town agreed on that." Hargrove grinned, a cold, wolfish stretch of teeth. "Unanimous vote. Mark her for what she is. Anyone helps her, joins her fate." The threat floated on the dry air like smoke from a dying fire. Jonas studied the riders. Hard faces, tight grips, hungry for violence. They wanted him to fight, wanted an excuse to spill blood. "I'm just passing through." Jonas said evenly. Gave her water. That's all. Good, Hargrove said. Then ride on. Forget she exists. Jonas glanced down at Rena. Her eyes held terror, and beneath it, a small, fragile spark. Defiance. The same spark that had once gotten him marked for death. What happens, Jonas asked quietly, if I don't? The scarred rider's hand dropped toward his gun. Hargrove's voice went low. Dark. Then you get to share her blessing, stranger. Rena grabbed Jonas's arm with surprising strength. Please, she begged, just go. I ain't worth dying for. But in her grip, Jonas felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. The memory of a noose tightening around his own neck. A town chanting. A girl he couldn't save. A girl whose death he'd carried like a stone in his chest. Jonas swallowed hard. Not again. Not this time. A new sound echoed across the canyon. Hooves from the other direction. Rena stiffened. Oh no, she breathed. They brought the preacher. Jonas turned just as a seventh rider emerged, dressed head to toe in black, coat billowing like a funeral shroud. Reverend Malachi Grieve. In his hand, he carried a branding iron. Red hot, still glowing. The smell of heated metal drifted on the wind. Rena pressed closer to Jonas, trembling violently. That's what they used on the others, she whispered. Anyone who showed me kindness, they branded him, too. Jonas's stomach turned. 6 riders. 7, counting the preacher. All armed. Already. He knew what running meant. He knew what staying meant. And in the blazing heat of the branding iron, Jonas felt the past claw its way back into the present. He wasn't walking away. Not from this girl. Not from this nightmare. Not from himself. Reverend Malachi Grieve stopped his horse a few yards from Jonas, the branding iron glowing in his hand like a piece of hell torn loose. Heat shimmered off its tip. The smell of scorched metal drifted on the dry wind. His black coat billowed behind him, making him look more specter than man. Figured you'd need this, Sheriff, Grieve said softly, voice smooth as polished bone. In case our visitor feels charitable. Rena pressed her back against the dead cottonwood, shaking so violently Jonas feared she might collapse. Her fingers dug into the dirt, gripping it like the earth might shield her. That's what they used on the others, she whispered. Mrs. Cranley gave me bread. They burned a cross on her cheek. Tommy Benson said he didn't think I was evil. They marked his shoulder. Jonas felt something cold slide down his spine. This wasn't law. This wasn't justice. This was ritual cruelty. Organized. Intentional. Sheriff Hargrove swung down from his saddle, boots kicking up small clouds of dust. He walked with the slow confidence of a man used to watching others break. Last chance, stranger, he said, stopping just short of Jonas. Mount up and go, or stay and join our little ceremony. The riders spread out, forming a half circle. Their horses snorted, pawing at the hard ground. Jonas counted weapons. 6 pistols on hips, 2 rifles strapped to saddles, and Grieve's glowing iron. Jonas's own revolver suddenly felt too light. Too small. Too slow. Rena clawed her way upright, breath shaking. Please, she whispered. Just go. I don't want nobody dying for me. Jonas didn't answer. Not yet. Not with the past crowding into his lungs. He'd seen this before. He'd seen what fear could turn people into. He'd seen a child hanged because a frightened town needed a villain. And he'd seen himself, powerless, shouting into a storm of rage that didn't care about truth. Hargrove stepped closer, hand resting on his gun. You know what the real danger is? Jonas said quietly, rising to his feet. Not this girl. It's grown men too scared to admit they don't understand something. The scarred rider barked a laugh. Listen to him preach. Reverend Grieve lifted the branding iron. Its red glow cast a faint light over Jonas's cheek. Faith demands proof, the preacher murmured. Mark the girl yourself, or you both burn. Jonas stared at the brand, felt the heat, and something deep in him cracked. He didn't flinch. Instead, memories crashed through him like thunder. A girl named Martha, barely 15, accused of witchcraft because she gathered herbs by moonlight. Jonas, then a young deputy, tried to shield her, a mob tearing her from his hands. The snap of a rope, his own near death when he spoke out. He hadn't saved Martha. but he'd spent 20 years wishing he had. Grieve leaned closer, voice like a whisper from coffin. I see it in your eyes. You've been here before. Jonas's fingers curled. His pulse thudded in his ears. He knew 7 against 1 ended only one way. Still he stepped forward. Rena grabbed his arm. Jonas, please, but he was already reaching. All right, Jonas said quietly. Give here. Relief flickered across several faces. They thought they'd won. Thought he'd break, as others had broken. Preacher Grieve smiled with cold triumph and handed him the branding iron. Jonas felt the weight. The heat pulsed through the leather-wrapped handle. Rena closed her eyes. Thank you for trying. A breath. A heartbeat. Dust drifting on the wind. Then Jonas moved. He spun, faster than his age should allow, and slammed the red-hot iron against Grieve's gun hand. The preacher's scream tore across the canyon, raw and shrill. The branding iron hissed as it burned flesh. His pistol clattered to the dirt. Jonas threw the iron aside and drew his revolver in one swift motion, aiming it straight at Sheriff Hargrove's chest. Should have chosen better company, Jonas said, voice cold as river stone. Chaos surged. The scarred rider lunged for his weapon, but froze when Jonas cocked his gun. Every other rider stiffened, torn between fear and fury. That iron touches her again, Jonas said, and this valley becomes a graveyard. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. You think one gun will hold back 7 men? Don't need to, Jonas replied. Just need to stop you. For a moment, no one breathed. And then, his name ain't Jonas Reddick, Rena whispered suddenly. I know who he is. Jonas stiffened. He hadn't told anyone his real name in 20 years. Rena's voice shook. He's Thaddeus Whitmore. He used to wear a badge, protected a girl once, and they tried to hang him for it. The canyon went silent. Sheriff Hargrove's face lit with recognition. Well now, he sneered. Thought you looked familiar. Deputy Whitmore, the traitor. You killed 3 men escaping the rope. 4, Jonas said softly. And they weren't my people anymore. The riders shifted uneasily. A man with nothing to lose is far more dangerous than a man begging to live. The scarred rider hissed. We ought to finish this now. Jonas didn't lower his gun. Step closer and see what happens. Suddenly, hoofbeats echoed again. Many horses, coming fast from the north. A second dust cloud rose on the ridge. Hargrove's smirk faltered. You expecting company, Whitmore? Jonas tensed. But it was Rena who spoke, voice trembling with hope. The circuit judge, he was supposed to come through Millwood today. Jonas felt a flicker of relief. Federal authority meant protection. Answers. Real justice. But then the riders crested the ridge, and Jonas's stomach dropped. These weren't lawmen. They were townsfolk, almost 20 of them, armed, furious, eyes wild with grief. At their head rode a woman whose scream split the air like a blade. That's her, she cried, pointing at Rena. That's the devil's child who killed my baby. Jonas felt the ground tilt beneath him. Another mob, another blind rage, another noose forming in the shadows. The circle tightened. Now there were nearly 30 against 2. Jonas's grip tightened on his revolver. Rena pressed against the tree, shaking so violently he could feel it through his boots. He had to choose. Fight, talk, run. Every option ended in blood. But he wasn't leaving her. Not this time. Not ever again. The second group of riders poured down the ridge like an avalanche of grief and rage. Dust billowed around their horses. Sunlight flashed off rifles and pitchforks. Their faces tight, hollow, furious, with the faces of people who had lost too much. At their front rode Constance Millwood, her gray-streaked hair whipping behind her, her cheeks streaked with tears and fury. That's her, she screamed again, pointing a shaking finger at Rena. That's the devil's child who cursed my baby. The crowd behind her murmured with dark agreement. Mothers clutching rosaries, men gripping rifles too tight. People who had buried their children, convinced they'd found the cause, standing right here under a dead cottonwood. Jonas stepped in front of Rena, planting his boots into the dirt. His wounded past burned hot behind his ribs. He'd stood in front of a mob before. He'd failed before. You would not fail today. Listen to me, Rena cried, voice cracking as she held up trembling hands. I never hurt nobody. I never cursed nobody. Please. I tried to help. Lies. Constance shrieked, near hysterical. We found your devil marks behind the church. Rena shook her head violently. No, those ain't curses. I was practicing letters, trying to copy healing recipes from my grandma's book. Jonas saw the truth in her eyes, saw the terror, saw the innocence, but the mob didn't. Fear had swallowed them whole. Sheriff Hargrove stepped forward, emboldened by fresh support. You see what we're dealing with, folks? A killer protecting a witch. They're bound to each other. Sheriff, Jonas said sharply, you're stoking a fire you know is built on lies. Hargrove's jaw clenched. Keep talking, Whitmore. I ain't in the mood to wait long. Before Jonas could answer, a grizzled rancher near the back squinted hard at him. I know that man, the rancher said, voice rising. That's Thaddeus Whitmore. Used to be law in Kansas. Till he went bad. The crowd murmured in fear, in recognition, in bloodlust. Constance stared at him with fresh horror. You protect her because you're the same. Marked by evil. Jonas felt a familiar sick weight settle in his chest. The past had claws, and those claws always found him. You don't know anything about me, Jonas said, voice low. We know you killed 4 men escaping the gallows, the rancher shouted. Their voices rose. Outlaw, heretic, witch protector. Jonas's heart hammered hard, but his mind stayed cold. He scanned the faces, saw panic, saw grief, saw a town ready to kill someone, anyone, if it meant easing their hurt for a moment. He'd seen this once. He still tasted the bitterness. Before you all become murderers, Jonas said loudly, there's something you need to see. He reached slowly, very slowly, into his coat. 20 guns cocked at once. Rena gasped. Don't move, but Jonas kept his motion smooth and steady. From inside his coat, he pulled a folded stack of papers wrapped in oilcloth. Territorial documents, official seals, signatures. The only reason he'd survived these last 2 decades. What's that supposed to be? Constance snapped. Proof, Jonas said, of what's really killing your children. Gasps, grumbling, fear swirling like a dust storm. Sheriff Hargrove stiffened, color draining from his face. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Jonas unfolded the first sheet. Letters crisp, seals deep. These are water surveys, mining reports, contamination readings from Blackstone Mining Company. He didn't get to finish. A single gunshot cracked like lightning across the canyon. Jonas jerked backward, heat exploding through his shoulder. The papers almost slipped from his hand. His vision dimmed at the edges. Rena screamed. Jonas hit the dirt hard, breath knocked from him. His shoulder burned like fire. Blood spread across his shirt. The smoking gun in Sheriff Hargrove's hand confirmed everything Jonas needed to know. He'd struck a nerve. The truth terrified Hargrove more than any devil. The papers fluttered in the wind. But Rena, despite shaking from head to toe, lunged forward and snatched them before they blew away. She stood over Jonas, clutching the papers to her chest. He ain't lying, she shouted, her voice ringing out stronger than anyone expected. Listen to this. Rena unfolded the top page and read aloud, voice quivering but clear. Mercury levels found in Millwood Creek. Contamination traced to runoff from Blackstone Mining Company's processing site. Exposure fatal to children and pregnant women. The crowd froze. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Constance staggered. What does that mean? Rena swallowed hard, tears streaming down her cheeks. It means your babies didn't die from no curse. They drank poison water. Shock rippled through the mob. Mrs. Henderson, the woman branded for helping Rena, stepped forward. My husband works at the mine, she said quietly. He told me they've been dumping barrels in the creek. Told me to hush about it. Another rancher spoke up. My cattle been dying ever since the expansion. My well water tastes like metal. Another woman whispered. Eyes turned slowly, one by one, to Sheriff Hargrove. And things finally clicked. You knew, Constance cried, her voice cracking. You knew and you lied. Hargrove shook his head wildly. No, no. The mining company said it was safe for $40 a month, Jonas rasped, pushing himself to his knees despite the pain. The crowd murmured in horror. They hadn't just been misled. They'd been weaponized. Judge Caldwell shut down a mine in Colorado for the same thing last year, Jonas said tightly. He'll recognize it. What judge? Hargrove sputtered. He ain't even. But Hargrove was cut off by a sound that rolled across the canyon. A fresh wave of riders. Official horses, hooves striking with purpose. And at their front rode a man in dark robes, face stern, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Territorial Judge Harrison Caldwell. He took in the scene at a glance. Jonas bleeding in the dirt. Rena with a carved forehead, a mob bristling with weapons, and Sheriff Hargrove holding a still-smoking gun. His voice boomed like a thunderclap. What in God's name is happening here? The canyon fell silent. Everyone knew this moment changed everything. Judge Harrison Caldwell dismounted in a single commanding motion, his black coat sweeping behind him like a storm cloud. He moved toward the scene with the steady purpose of a man whose presence alone could shift the fate of a town. His sharp eyes flicked from Jonas, bleeding and struggling to stay upright, to Rena, her forehead carved and skin bruised, then to the mob clutching weapons with shaky hands. Finally, his gaze landed on Sheriff Hargrove and the smoking gun in his grip. Sheriff Tobias Hargrove, Caldwell said, his voice cold as winter steel, lower your weapon. Now. Hargrove swallowed hard, but the tremor of fear in his hand betrayed him. He holstered the gun with a jerk. Judge, I can explain. You'd better, Caldwell snapped. Before I charge you with attempted murder and dereliction of duty. Jonas tried to stand but buckled, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Rena dropped beside him, pressing her small hands against the wound with trembling resolve. Stay still, she whispered. You'll bleed worse if you move. Jonas winced, but didn't push her away. Caldwell turned to the crowd, his stern face growing darker as he saw Rena's carved forehead. Who did this to that child? He demanded. Silence spread across the group like a sickness. Finally, Constance Millwood stepped forward, her grief-worn face trembling. Judge, we thought she cursed our children. We thought she brought the fever. By what evidence? Caldwell challenged. By symbols she wrote in the dirt? By books you didn't understand? She was scribbling strange things. Constance cried. Words and marks. Rena reached for her grandmother's herbal book, pulling it from the ragged folds of her dress. These were healing recipes, she said, opening it to a page filled with drawings of plants. My grandma taught me herbs. I was trying to learn the letters. I didn't know how to read proper. I wrote the words to remember how to mix for fever. Judge Caldwell studied the page, then glanced at the carved word on her forehead. Rage flickered behind his eyes. This child was trying to heal you, he said, and you tortured her instead. Several in the mob dropped their gazes, shame surfacing for the first time. But Hargrove stepped forward, desperate. Judge, don't listen to her. This man's filled her head with lies. He's a criminal, a killer. Thaddeus Whitmore. Yes, Caldwell cut in. I know exactly who he is. Jonas stiffened, pain forgotten for a moment. Caldwell approached him slowly. Whitmore, he said quietly. I read your case back in Kansas. I know what that mob did. You tried to save a girl accused of witchcraft. They hanged her anyway, didn't they? Jonas swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. Yes, sir. And when you challenged the injustice, they tried to hang you too. Jonas said nothing. He didn't need to. Caldwell stood, turning to the crowd with fire in his voice. I will not watch another innocent child be sacrificed to fear and superstition. He motioned to Rena. Show me those papers, child. Rena stepped forward, clutching the mining documents Jonas had revealed. Her hands trembled as she held them out. Judge Caldwell took them carefully, scanning the pages. The veins in his neck darkened with anger. Blackstone Mining Company, he said, voice rough with disgust. I shut down their Colorado site for the same crime. Mercury contamination that killed 16 children. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled across the crowd. Caldwell glared at Sheriff Hargrove. You knew. he said. You knew there was poison in the water. You knew it killed these babies. Hargrove shook his head wildly. No, it wasn't like that. The company said it was safe after they paid you $40 every month, Caldwell said sharply, holding up the evidence. The crowd gasped. Men pulled back. Mothers covered their mouths. Constance Millwood's face drained of color. You let us blame this child, she whispered. You let us torture her, carve her. Hargrove stumbled backward. It wasn't my fault. The company, enough. Caldwell's voice cracked like a whip. You abused your badge. You fed this town lies. You let parents bury their children while you pocketed blood money. Mrs. Henderson, her cheek still bearing the fresh cross-shaped brand, stepped forward. My husband said the mine dumped barrels in the creek. Said the foreman threatened him if he told. Others joined. My cattle died from that water. Our well tasted strange since spring. Sheriff said the fever was natural. Judge Caldwell pointed at his deputies. Arrest Sheriff Hargrove. Preacher grieved too. Greaves' burned hand twitched as he stumbled back. They practiced witchcraft, Judge. We acted. In faith, Caldwell rounded on him. Torturing a child is not faith. It is savagery. As deputies restrained Hargrove and Grieve, Constance Millwood collapsed to her knees. She stared at Rena with tears streaming down her cheeks. We hurt you, she whispered. We blamed you for our babies. God forgive us. Rena's lips trembled. I didn't want nobody's children hurt. I was trying to help. The mob lowered their weapons, shame weighing down their shoulders. Jonas tried to rise again, but staggered. Caldwell caught him under one arm. Easy, the judge said. You're losing blood. Rena looked at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. You shouldn't have stayed, she whispered. You didn't owe me nothing. Jonas placed a shaking hand on her shoulder. You remind me of someone, he said softly. Someone I failed. I wasn't going to fail again. Caldwell nodded toward his deputies. Get these two to town, he said. The girl needs medical care. And Whitmore needs a doctor before he bleeds out. Rena clutched Jonas's sleeve. You'll be okay, she asked, voice thin. Jonas managed a faint, pained smile. I've been hurt worse, he said, but I ain't ever been more sure I did the right thing. Rena's breath stuttered with quiet relief. As they began the slow walk toward the judge's riders, Jonas felt consciousness tugging at him. The sky swirled above him in harsh sunlight. Before darkness pulled him under, he heard Judge Caldwell say, Whitmore, when this is over, the territory could use a man like you. And Jonas realized, for the first time in 20 years, he wasn't running anymore. Jonas drifted in and out of consciousness as the judge's riders escorted them back toward Millwood. That, Jonas said, his voice gravel-soft. Helping you is the first thing I've done right in years. Rena, wipe her cheeks. You shouldn't have to suffer for me. Sometimes, Jonas said, closing his eyes briefly as pain flared. The worth of a person ain't measured by how easy they are to stand beside, but how wrong it'd be to leave him alone. Rena froze. Her breath hitched. No one had ever said something like that to her. Miss Adler worked quickly, cleaning the wound, stitching it with steady hands, binding his shoulder tight. When she finished, Jonas lay pale but awake. You're not dying today, Miss Adler said firmly. That's a comfort, Jonas muttered, managing a weak smirk. Rena sat beside him, refusing to step away. Moments later, Judge Caldwell stepped inside. Whitmore, he said, I need to speak with both of you. Rena stiffened. Caldwell pulled up a chair, his face solemn. I've questioned Hargrove, Grieve, and the miners, he began. What happened here? It's worse than we thought. Jonas nodded slowly. Figured as much. Blackstone was paying the sheriff to ignore reports of contamination. The preacher helped him stir up fear to distract from the sickness. In the town, Caldwell exhaled. The town let grief blind them. Rena lowered her gaze, her fingers twisting in her lap. It ain't all their fault, she whispered. People do desperate things when they're scared. Scared or not, Caldwell said. What they did to you was barbaric. Rena didn't answer, but Jonas watched the judge's eyes soften. I've arranged something for you, Caldwell continued. There's a school for orphan children in Denver. A proper one. They teach reading, writing, even botanical medicine. A place where you'd be safe. Rena's breath caught. Me? Go to Denver. You'd learn to read those herb books, Caldwell said. Maybe even become a healer, if that's what you want. Tears welled in her eyes. Not from fear, but from something brighter. Hope. Jonas watched her struggle to speak. I always wanted to help people, she whispered. Like my grandma. I didn't think anyone'd ever give me a chance. You've earned it, Caldwell said. Rena looked at Jonas. Are you coming with us? Jonas hesitated. The room felt too still. That's up to the judge, he said quietly. Caldwell nodded. I won't lie. Your past is complicated. But today you prevented a lynching, exposed corruption, and stopped a mob from killing an innocent child. He met Jonas's eyes. If you're willing, the territory could use a man like you. As deputy federal law. Jonas stared at him. For 20 years he'd been running, hiding, surviving. A man with no place. Now out of nowhere, he was being offered not just a badge, but a purpose. What about my record? Jonas asked. I'll see it cleared. Jonas inhaled slowly. He glanced at Rena, who watched him with wide, hopeful eyes. Maybe he wasn't meant to wander forever. He nodded once. All right, he said. I'll stand with the law again. Rena smiled, small, trembling, but real. Miss Adler stepped forward then, brushing Rena's hair gently. There's one more thing, child, she said softly. We need to tend to your forehead. Rena reached up instinctively, touching the carved word. Unwanted. Tears burn her eyes. It'll fade, Miss Adler said. In time. Jonas shook his head weakly. No, he murmured. We ain't leaving that word to scar her life. He looked at Rena. You hear me? That word don't belong to you. Never did. Rena blinked, tears spilling, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were the first tears of healing. Outside, the town waited in heavy silence. Inside, for the first time since the nightmare began, Rena felt seen, protected, wanted, but the journey was far from over, and the next sunrise would bring consequences and choices for everyone involved. Night fell over Millwood like a blanket laid gently across the desert. Lamps flickered in windows. Horses settled in their stalls. And for the first time in a long while, the town felt quiet, almost reverent. Judge Caldwell's deputies finished locking Sheriff Hargrove and Reverend Grieve in his separate cells. No one spoke. No one protested. The clank of the iron bars echoed down the street like an ending. Inside Miss Adler's apothecary, Jonas lay propped against pillows, eyes half open but alert. His bandaged shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, but the fog of pain had lifted just enough for him to think clearly again. Rena sat in the chair beside him, chin tucked to her chest as she dozed lightly. The lamp beside her cast a warm glow across her bruised skin, softening the harsh edges of what she'd endured. Jonas watched her breathe. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the urge to get back on his horse and ride until the world forgot him again. The door creaked open. Judge Caldwell stepped in, removing his hat. She asleep? He whispered. Near about, Jonas murmured. Caldwell nodded, lowering his voice. There's talk spreading around the town already. Folks want to apologize. Others want to help pay her way to Denver. Some don't know what to do with the shame they feel. Jonas huffed quietly. Guilt's a heavy saddle, but not heavier than justice, Caldwell said. And today justice finally caught up to Millwood. Rena stirred then, her eyes fluttering open. Judge, she asked, voice raspy. Caldwell crouched beside her. I didn't want to wake you, he said gently, but I've come to ask something important. Rena straightened, nervous. Am I in trouble? No, child, Caldwell said, shaking his head. Quite the opposite. He stood again, addressing both of them. Tomorrow at sunrise, we'll hold a hearing. Formal charges. Witness statements. The truth will be laid bare for every soul in this town. And I need you there, Rena, not to relive your suffering, but to clear your name. Rena swallowed hard. They'll listen to me? They will, Caldwell said, because I'll make them. Jonas shifted slightly, gripping his shoulder to steady himself. What about after? He asked. You still off-airing her that place in Denver? Yes, the judge said softly. She deserves a fresh start, a clean slate, education, safety, a life. Rena's breath hitched. I ain't never left this county. Jonas looked at her, voice low. Maybe it's time. She hesitated, eyes darting between them. Will you come too? She asked Jonas. The question was soft, fragile, full of fear she didn't want to reveal. Jonas's chest tightened. He'd spent years believing he was a man cursed to walk alone. But maybe he'd been wrong. Caldwell answered for him. Jonas Reddick, Thaddeus Whitmore, will be sworn in tomorrow after the hearing. Deputy U.S. Marshal. Once his record's expunged, he'll have authority across the territory. Rena's eyes widened with pride. Jonas shook his head slightly. Still a lot I gotta reckon with. That's true, Caldwell said. But reckoning is easier when you're not running anymore. Rena reached for Jonas's good hand and held it gently. You saved me, she whispered. You didn't have to, but you did. I'm a live cause of you. Jonas swallowed hard, overwhelmed by something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Purpose. The judge rose. Get some rest. Tomorrow brings a new beginning for both of you. At sunrise, the entire town gathered outside the courthouse. Dust floated in the cool morning air as people stood shoulder to shoulder, faces tight with remorse, fear, or determination. Rena walked beside Jonas and Judge Caldwell, her head held a little higher than yesterday. Miss Adler had cleaned the carved word on her forehead, soothing the broken skin with salves. The scars remained, but the pain behind her eyes had eased. Inside, Caldwell opened the hearing with an iron voice. Today we face the truth you all refused to see. This child was no witch. This man was no outlaw. And the real evil came not from curses, but from greed. He laid out the mining documents, the bribery, the poisoning, the lies. One by one, townsfolk stood to confess what fear had made them do. Some cried, some shook, some couldn't lift their heads. Constance Millwood approached Rena with trembling hands. I blamed you for my baby's death, she said. And I hurt you because I couldn't bear the truth. I'm so sorry. Rena's lip trembled. I forgive you, she whispered. We all lose our way sometimes. The room quieted. Tears spread through the benches like ripples. Sheriff Hargrove and Reverend Grieve were sentenced to prison. Blackstone Mining faced federal shutdown. Millwood would rebuild, slowly, painfully. Outside the courthouse, Rena stood staring at the distant horizon. The wind tugged at her dress. She touched the fading scar on her forehead. Jonas stepped beside her. Denver's a long ride, he said gently. Not as long as what came before, she whispered. He nodded. You ready? She turned to him, eyes steady, older than her 16 years, yet shining with new hope. Only if you're coming too. Jonas smiled, small, worn, and honest. I reckon I am. Judge Caldwell approached with freshly signed papers. Deputy Whitmore, he said, handing Jonas a badge polished bright. Welcome back to the law. Jonas stared at it, thumb brushing the star's metal surface. For the first time since he was a young man, it didn't feel heavy. It felt right. Rena took his hand again. Now we get to start over, she whispered. Jonas squeezed her fingers. No, he said softly. Now we get to live. Together, they stepped toward the waiting horses, toward Denver, toward healing, toward a future neither believed they'd ever see. The girl once branded unwanted now carried something stronger than any scar. A purpose. And the wanderer who thought he'd lost his own finally found it again. If you felt this tale in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Wild West Emotional Tales, where every story rides through the dust, the danger, and the kind of love that never dies. See you in the next tale, partner.